I think we'll get started, and then if anyone else joins, they can catch up. So this webinar is about getting and using Chameleon tool performance data. It's all about analytics, how to understand how your tools are performing, and how to improve that performance. My name is Pulkit. I'm one of the co-founders of Chameleon. We started Chameleon a few years ago to make it easy for you to improve user onboarding, as a very common use case where users are now signing up to products. They want to discover the key value before they make a decision. So you really need to show them to the aha moment. That's one of the important use cases. But there are other important use cases, feature launches. Whenever you change something or add new functionality, it's very important that users actually adopt this. Otherwise, what's the point? And sometimes they need a little bit of a nudge or some guidance to help explain that. And that's really goes as part of an ongoing education curriculum we encourage you to have with product tools, so that you don't teach everything up front, which can be very overwhelming, but you actually show users more functionality and nudge them towards other actions over the course of their life cycle, depending on what they've done so far. And that's some of the best teams that use Chameleon embed it as part of their process, so that you're regularly building tools. I think the slides are not showing up, so let me just fix this. Okay, hopefully you can see my slides now. You should. So you build up Chameleon as part of your process, so that whenever there's a change to a functionality or a product launch, you can build a tool for it, or you can evaluate tools ongoing. So this is 3 example use cases that you can use Chameleon for. Other examples include scaling support. So if you have a confusing workflow or something where users need more support, you can have a tool, or for upselling or marketing your product or other plans, or for ad hoc notifications. So there's a broad range of use cases for which you can use Chameleon. One of the key parts of this, for all of these use cases, is that really the guidance should be evolving and iterative. So your product obviously is changing as you're making changes. Your users are changing because when they first sign up, what their expectations are, and what their expectations and requirements are down the road are different. And also the market is changing. New users may know something different about your product now than new users did 6 months ago. So your onboarding may need to change based on what the updated understanding of your product is in the market. So all of this continues to change, and that's why it's important to continue to adapt your product guidance. And you should think of it as a process or a system, not just as a one-off project. So your product is evolving, your website you're continuing to optimize, and so you should think of this as something similar, something that keeps changing as part of your product, really, rather than a set and forget project that you do one-off. And that's why having a SaaS solution can be really effective, because you don't need to go back to engineers or your in-house solution to keep changing this. You have the power without depending on anyone else to go and make these changes and quickly iterate. Now, part of the iteration involves you understanding how your tools are performing, and Chameleon helps with that by collecting some of this data automatically. It collects 2 kinds of data: events, which are when users are acting, and properties, so attributes of those events. Now it happens on a tool level. So this is looking at overall whenever the tool was started by a user or completed or exited, that's an event that's tracked. And that has contributing attributes or properties such as the name of the tool, the ID, the URL, the duration between the starting and completed, the ID of the user that did the event, and of course the timestamp. So these are some example properties that come with all of those events. There's also an event at step level. So whenever a step is seen, then that is an event that's fired, and then that has some additional properties are all around the step configuration. So what is the matching type, whether it's just a URL or it's also an element? What type of trigger is it? Immediately does it show, or does it have a delay? Where is it positioned? Is there a highlight? What the copy is? Which components? So there's all these additional attributes for that step seen event, and that'll be helpful in a different way, as we'll see. So we automatically collect this data. It's all default data. You can send additional data also to Chameleon that you might want to analyze together with these events. There are a few different ways to do this. Segment.com is a API management tool, so you can use that and our integration with that to send the data by that. Or we also have a front-end JavaScript and back-end REST APIs that allow you to send other user attributes data. And that can be helpful in various different places, but it can also be helpful in analyzing your product, your Chameleon performance data. And there's a help article. We'll be sending this deck afterwards. There's a help article to help you understand that. Now, there's a few different places where you can view this data. So you're sending this data. How do you get this your performance data out? One is the default reporting built within Chameleon. So from the sidebar, you can see for any tour what the overall start and completion is, and the drop off or completion at every step. Now, this is great because it's available whenever you're building a tour or editing a tour. It makes it very easy to quickly see performance over any date range. And you can see kind of steps with the most step drop off and say, okay, well, this is a step that I want to edit. So I can quickly click into this and start editing that step. It's a very quick turnaround. So that's kind of one of the simplest, easiest ways to view this data. Another way is a CSV export. So from the same view, the performance view, you can email a CSV. That CSV will contain a list of all of the events that include the tour events and the step events, alongside some of their attributes, and they'll be emailed to you for that time range for that tour. And it's great because it allows you to do more custom analysis. So it's kind of almost like a database format, and you can use pivot tables to do this analysis. So there's a help article about this. If you click into this, you'll see this. And this help article talks about not just how to do the CSV export, but it talks about the glossary of the different columns that will be exported alongside this. And it kind of includes some default properties and also some of your custom properties. And then it also provides a link to a template for a Google Sheet that we have created that helps you use this exported data to do some analysis. So we have some dummy data in here. You can copy paste and add your own data. And then it basically has some pre-built pivot tables. So a pivot table essentially allows you to cut this data and sort it in some way. So you can select in this what categories you want. So in this, for example, I have the event name, and then the total sum or the total number of those events fired. So just using this whole list of data, I can kind of quickly summarize that to see, okay, well, how many of these events were fired? Or I can, for example, use the step number and how many events that they happen to see, kind of a funnel of how many times people saw each of these steps within that tour. So that's kind of an example, a way to create a funnel and evaluate your funnel. Or I can use kind of the average time per step to see how long people are spending on each of those steps. And so this is just simple ways to create pivot tables. You can, of course, create any of your own pivot tables as well, but you can use this downloadable template that's available from this help article, which is called How to Analyze Exported Tour Data. You can search for it or click from slides once they're sent to you. That's two ways to get your analytics data. The third way is to connect an integration. So we have various integrations, including the ones listed here. The benefit of connecting an integration is that you will be able to see your Chameleon tour data alongside any other product usage data that you're already collecting. So presumably you're evaluating how your users are engaging or retaining, and you have instrumented some analytics for your product. And so that can be supplemented with tour data. And that means that you can then create a funnel that consists of both people seeing tours, but then also going ahead and actually completing other actions. So you could say, okay, well, how many users started this tour and then took this action? Or of this cohort, how many people started a tour? So you have the full capabilities from your analytics tool available to you by importing your data into this. It's pretty simple to set up these integrations. You can do it from the sidebar. And we do have a whole range of user guides. So for each integration, we have a user guide around how to set it up and how to use it. Again, available in our help center at help.trychameleon.com. Now, the last way to get data out is to use our API. So we have an API that will allow you to pull a range of data, such as tour data or user data. And this is helpful because you can then send this data programmatically back to your database or your BI tool or any other system. For example, maybe a marketing automation tool that you use or a CRM tool or something. And you can connect it to any other tool if you wanted to see whether a user is engaged in a tool or how far they've got, etc. It can also allow you to do some custom querying. You can build your own custom reports based on what your internal dashboarding or reporting solution looks like. So those are 4 different examples of ways you can pull out data from Chameleon depending on what's convenient for you. I'll take a pause for quick questions. There's a question around Heap being GDPR compliant. I think that that's going to be a question for Heap. I presume they will be looking to be GDPR compliant. We are looking to be GDPR compliant. We haven't fully undergone that process to assess the changes that need to be made, but we are planning on doing that in the next months. I think the deadline for GDPR is May 28th, so we'll be ready before then. Okay, moving on. There's another great way to see, provide a more qualitative understanding of how tours are performing, which is a tool called fullstory. If you're not familiar with it, we'd recommend it. It basically allows you to watch session replays of what's going on in your product. So this means once you implement fullstory, you'll be able to watch videos of people interacting with your product. Now, this includes Chameleon tours. So you'll be able to see how people are engaging with the tours and then how they are going on and interacting with your product. And this gives you a more qualitative understanding of maybe what they're intending or what they're trying to click on or what they do next. And so this gives you a bit more of a visual feel of what's going on. So, to learn more, go and check out the fullstory website. Chameleon tours are compatible, and so they will show up in your fullstory sessions and recordings. Now, the benefit of getting this data, some of the questions that you should think about asking or you may want to answer include what is the overall completion of a tour. So this obviously helps if you want your tour to be a strong completion. And so if users are dropping off, then there may be a problem with the tour. So that could be something that you want to look at. Or over time, you might want to improve completion of a tour by making changes. So overall completion is an important aspect. You might want to look at which users have seen or completed or exited a particular tour. That might be valuable if you want to send them follow-ups, or if there's some kind of troubleshooting that you want to assess and see. You want to check if a user has seen that tour or not. You might want to look at which step has the most drop-off within a tour. This might be if you're looking for quick wins for improvements. You might want to start with the step that has the most drop-off and think about where are users getting stuck. Is the information not clear? Is the step not showing for some reason, etc. You might want to look at some more specifics. We looked at all of the step level attributes for the step seen event. And so you could use those attributes to conduct some more detailed performance, more analysis. So for example, you could say, okay, well, I have some steps that are highlighted across my tours. How does that affect whether the step is completed? And so you could use those attributes to do more analysis. You can also do that analysis based on groups of users. So for example, if you're sending custom properties such as role, you could say, okay, well, how does the role affect whether a step is seen or whether a tour is completed or not? And maybe there's some insights there around users who are not kind of power users or users who are not admins having different performance or completion stats, and maybe that means you can target them differently with a different kind of tool. And then you can also, of course, look at how when people complete a tour, how do they then go on and complete a product event? Because that's the eventual goal. You want people to engage with your product. And so this can help you think about that. So those are some ways, some questions you can answer. I'm going to talk about now some kind of best practices around when you're kind of building a tour, how to think about that. And in fact, we encourage everything to be very goal specific, each tour to be very goal specific. The way to think about this is start with the metric that you're trying to improve. So it might be a feature adoption metric, or it might be a conversion metric. For example, you're trying to convert free trial users to paid, or you're trying to convert somebody from this complete setup. So what's the goal? What's the metric? And this might come from your kind of product goals or your business goals for the quarter or for the month, etc. Now, when you've got that metric, think about what is the specific user action that contributes to the metric. It's very hard to change the overall metric or be able to kind of iterate on an overall metric that's very broad and has multiple factors. And so what we try to do is try to bring it down into very specific actions. So let's say it's a conversion goal, then maybe the specific user action is clicking a button that causes them to sign up, or maybe if it's an adoption, or if it's an adoption metric, then them utilizing that feature by loading that page where that feature is on. So what is the specific action that is that contributes to that metric? And then you want to set that as the target for the tool. So say, okay, setting a broad overall, we want to improve adoption is hard to measure and adopt to change. But if you say, okay, well, adoption is caused by people loading this page, we want people to load this page, that's going to be the target for the tool. That's a lot easier to track and then improve. And so then ideally you'd want this action to be tracked already. So, you should be able to measure page loads, or should be able to measure clicks on that. And so that will give you the baseline data, which you can then compare with. And then, then you want to think about the content of the tool. So, and think about what is it that would cause people to take this action. So it could be that they don't know how to do this. And so that's kind of more of a direction level guidance. So you want to point out something, this is where you do this. Or it might be a motivation thing where they don't know why they should be taking that action, or why it's beneficial for them. So that's kind of, maybe you can add an improved motivation by explaining the value proposition of this new feature, or the value proposition of your product. So think about, what is it that will drive people to take this action? And then you can plan a short tool to kind of meet this gap by adding that into a tool. So that's kind of some of the things you should be thinking about before you actually start building a tool. This will help your tool be goal driven, and then be able to assess and improve that tool. I'll take a quick pause for another question. So alternative to Heap for analytics events. I mean, I think, I would recommend Mixpanel or Amplitude. Those seem to be the most common and popular options aside from Heap. I think Mixpanel does have an auto track feature, although I haven't used it. I don't know if Amplitude does. So those would be the ones that I would kind of recommend. You can query our data with our API. I'll have to get back to you regarding Elasticsearch. I mean, from my understanding, is that would be, you'd first be able to pull the data into your database and then use your Elasticsearch for slicing and dicing. So that's kind of how I would expect. But if you have a more specific question, I can get back to you on that. And I think there's another question, but it seems very specific. So I think we'll cover that afterwards. Okay, so the second piece of this is, once you have built a tool and you've activated a tool, what's the process towards improving that and iterating on that? So how we would recommend this, you proceed on this, is to think about a time frame to measure impact. You might want to set a calendar event, let's say a month out, or maybe you have a weekly session where you review tools with your team or review performance. And so you kind of having some kind of time goal where you're reviewing performance is going to be a helpful basis upon which to improve and iterate. And then you can think about, what is your process for getting that data? Are you going to be using CSV exports regularly, or are you going to be importing it into an analytics tool and generating a report regularly? But having that nailed down also will be helpful to say, okay, well, this is my process. This is how you could just use the reporting inbuilt within Chameleon also. Then you review, assess the goal. It's like, we had a goal. Was the goal met? And maybe if you're iterating, you can have smaller goals or different goals on a weekly or monthly cadence. But really, assess, was the goal met? And assess, if not, what could be the potential causes? If it was, great, what would be the next goal? And then think about, what are the places for improvement and scope for improvement? So you can do this quantitatively based on the data and say, okay, well, this step is causing drop off, or this overall tour completion is 70%. We want to move it to 80%. Where can we improve that? You can also interview users that might have exited the tour to ask what caused them to exit, or take a survey of users to see if they were finding the tours helpful. Fullstory, as I mentioned, also kind of maybe will provide some insight into why people are dropping off. And so then you're kind of looking for ways to improve it, and that's kind of maybe like look at some creative ways, but there's more experimentation involved. And then obviously you would update the tour and then review again. So that's kind of a bit of a process, but it'd be good to, if there's other people on your team involved in this tour building, have a structured process around this so that you can continue to iterate tours on a regular basis. Okay, so I'm going to this is a short webinar. We're coming towards the end of the webinar. There's a poll that it'd be great if you could fill out. And then I'd love to hear from you if there's additional analytics that you would like to see. We are looking to improve our analytics. We are probably going to be building a separate dashboard too to see more overall analytics. If there's anything else that you'd like, we'd love to hear from you either now or afterwards. We have more resources available on our help center, help.trichameleon.com. Do encourage you to check those out, as well as on our blog, where we have kind of articles around how to think about great product tours and the psychology around helping kind of motivate and convince users. And you can always email us at help@trichameleon.com. For any specific questions that you have. So that's kind of brings us to the end of this webinar. We have a couple minutes left. Feel free to ask any questions. I'll try and cover the ones that have been asked, but I'll give myself a 1 minute break to see if there's any other questions too. Question around branching. We are looking at ways to allow first level branching. So 2 kind of button options within a step, and each button has a different action. So it could launch a different tour, for example, or 2 different actions. So that's something that's closer on the agenda. We do then, in the future roadmap, do have the ability to add multiple buttons, more than 2. So that branching is something that we're looking at. And so there's some specific question around encoding parameters. It'd be great if we could pick that up separately. It sounds like maybe I'd need a bit more information about what's going on there, and we could do a little screen share, etc. Okay, well, thank you for joining. We'd look forward to hearing any feedback that you have or any of the requests that you have for features. We're always keen to hear your inputs. So please do share them either by email or from the chat board from our help center. Thanks for joining today's webinar. We will be sending a recording out shortly in the next couple of days.